The other day, as I was zooming across the bay on my last catamaran, the mast broke in two, snapped clean through, and everything, including me, ended up in the water. Anyway, I thought, whilst I'm mending the mast, I could maybe knock up an improved version of the catamaran. After all, it looks pretty rough, even though it sailed surprisingly well. It looked rough because it's only made of builder's materials and it costs very, very little. As usual, I'm just making this up as I go along, but the new one is basically a tidier version of the old one. I used roughly the same measurements everywhere, but the main difference is the construction of the hulls. I thought I'd stitch and glue plywood sheets together for a more stylish look and possibly a faster boat. I used card to model the hulls based on the old measurements. If my calculations are right, it has the same buoyancy, though I took some from the back and added it to the front. That's because on a catamaran, the forward bow is pushed down into the water by the sail, and if it goes down too far, it'll get stuck in the water and the whole thing will tip over. When it looked about right,
that looks about right,
I scaled up the model to make the full-size version. As you know, if you can make a model in card, you can probably make the same thing in plywood, though it does depend on how thick the ply is that you use. This is still a prototype, so I didn't want to buy expensive marine ply. Instead, I bought 4 sheets of the cheapest 5mm ply available and a length of spruce wood. If I speed up the video too much, the sound disappears. But if I don't speed it up, we'll be here all day, so you'll just have to imagine sound effects. I began by feathering the edges of the sheets so I could glue them together to make a 4-meter long hull. I'm using epoxy resin for this. It's the same method we use to make our rowing boat, which is 25 years old and still going strong, though we did use marine ply for that one. The feathering means there's lots of surface area on the join. Then I cut the shapes out roughly and I stacked them up so I could make them all identical. I suppose I could hum in the quiet bits if you like. No, perhaps not. Then I wired them together with thin brass wire and spread them open, and this is the first time it looked like a hull. I'm not sure what this part is called. I'm calling it a ladder. I made it using lots of thin strips of wood layered and overlapping. This will hold the sides apart and give me something to screw the top down into. It looks a bit flimsy, but I'm hoping that the basic triangulation of the design will make everything strong enough. As I say, it's still just a prototype. Here's the transom going in, just a triangle of wood. Then I glued and filled the ladder into place and did the same with the 2 sides where they meet at the bottom. That's the pigs in the background that you can hear, telling everyone very loudly that it's dinner time. The whole point of this catamaran is that it should be light enough for me to lift on my own. I'm hoping I'll be able to pick it up, carry it down to the beach, sit on and sail away. So every time I add something, I'm conscious that it's only making the catamaran heavier. Anyway, once the hull was rigid enough to handle, I cut holes in the bottom of it to accommodate lengths of timber that run right up through the hull and stick out underneath for the keel. And for the rudder keel. I'm not sure what that's really called, but you know what I mean, the bit just before the rudder. And then I wrapped plywood around to make the keels, hoping that the central sticks of wood would be strong enough. Here's one of the noses being made for the pointy bit at the front of the bow. and some laminated bent wood on the inside of the curves. After that, I put the top on and trimmed the edges off. And all this was fine and moved along quite quickly, but it's a bit tedious to have to make a second hull. And that's the drawback of catamarans. These are two of everything. And then covering them with resin and glass cloth was slow and sticky and smelly and dusty and expensive. So I'm really hoping that this thing's going to work. We can make you a dress out of this. Be really handy because it'd be fireproof. Okay, some resin, please. Good mixing. This method of boat building is called stitch and glue because you stitch the plywood together and then you glue up the joints to make them watertight. Well, at this rate I'll be waterproof by the end of it. And if you want, you can sand and fill the surface and make a really smart looking finish. But of course I'm just keen to get this finished as far as I need to see if it works before I spend any more time and money on filler and paint. I decided I didn't need as many cross beams as in the old one, which will save some weight, and I hope I'm right. But I am keeping the old bent water pipe for the last cross beam because it worked really well as a sliding bar for the main sheet, and it doubles up as the hinge poles for the rudders. I used PVC sewer pipe to make the straps that go around the rudders. I just heated them up with a heat gun and bent them into shape. They were a bit hot. And here's an old hammock Mike gave me for the net in the middle. Thanks, Mike. I'll need this so I can get from one hull to the other without falling in. Now, of course, at this point I was very keen to see whether I could still lift all this stuff. Catamarans are much easier for one person to lift than boats, but you need to find the centre of gravity. And I had to cut out some of the hammock to get to the right place. And I could lift it, but only just. All that resin weighs a lot, but I added some strapping to make it easier, and I think I should be able to manage just about. Do you think these will ever catch on as fashion accessories? What the best dressed man will be wearing to the beach next year? This is the fourth one I've made, and each has been a big improvement on the one before. One day I'll get a perfect catamaran, but not on this one probably. And this is the glued and screwed mast. It's the one my granddad made 40 years ago. That and the sail is all that's left of the original mirror dinghy that he made. I'm trying to keep it going as long as I can, but it is possible its sailing days are over. So that's it, all ready now for the maiden voyage. I'm excited to see what happens, but this is what the bay looked like the last time I passed, so I'm waiting for more benign conditions. Stay tuned for the launch.